Washington Journal continues.
Lawrence Wright is a staff writer with the New Yorker magazine. In last week's issue, he writes about Ayman al-Zawahiri. And in the article, Mr. Wright writes, "One line of thinking proposes that America's tragedy on September 11th was born in the prisons of Egypt." What do you mean by that?
Well, Ayman al-Zawahiri and a number of the other Islamists in Egypt were rounded up after the assassination of Sadat in 1981. And they were apparently subjected to really appalling torture. It seems to be a theme in Egyptian prisons that they're beaten with cables, they have their hands sort of handcuffed behind them, and then they're hung on doors with by their hands and left for long periods of time, and sometimes thrown into into cells with vicious dogs. And this kind of treatment seems to have changed the movement. Before 1981, there was an Islamic movement in Egypt, but it was not near as violent as it became when these people came out of prison. Something transforming happened in those Egyptian prisons.
And Ayman al-Zawahiri was in Egyptian prison?
Yeah, he was there for 3 years, 1981 to 1984.
Why?
He was one of the people that was caught on this dragnet of people rounded up in connection with the Sadat assassination. He was on trial with more than 300 other people. And eventually, after 3 years, he was found guilty of possessing a gun and sentenced to 3 years in prison, which he had already served. But the trial itself took 3 years.
Now, how today would most Americans know who Ayman al-Zawahiri is?
He's the number 2 man. He's bin Laden's lieutenant. He's the guy, the doctor that you always see over bin Laden's shoulder. And he's the, many people think, the brains behind the operation.
Where did he grow up, and how did he grow up, and how did that influence him?
Well, he grew up in a very middle-class neighborhood called Mahdi, right outside of Cairo. And it's a very beautiful neighborhood. It was created at the turn of the 20th century by Jewish developers, and it was a very cosmopolitan, upper-class neighborhood. He kind of grew up on the opposite side of the tracks in that particular neighborhood, however, and was never really on the inside. But it was, I think, not at all the kind of neighborhood you would think that a terrorist or anyone who was anti-American would come from. It was, very much an American compound in some ways. I used to live in Egypt 30 years ago, and I would play tennis at the Mahdi Club occasionally.
And what influenced him then to join the Islamic Jihad, or to form the Islamic Jihad?
Right. He had... his family was very distinguished to begin with, and on his mother's side, the Azam family, very radical side of the family, his uncle, Mahfouz Azam, was, when he was a young man, when he was 15, was rounded up after an assassination attempt on the Egyptian prime minister. So there was already this kind of violent political action in the family. Mahfouz Azam was the lawyer for Sayyid Qutb, who is the kind of philosopher king of the Islamic movement. He was arrested by Nasser in 1960 and hung in 1966. And he wrote a book called Milestones, which is the book that all this goes back to. This is the book that influenced all these people. And the year that Nasser had him hanged, young Ayman al-Zawahiri, 15 years old, created this cell in his high school to overthrow the Egyptian government.
And go back to this gentleman again. I want to make sure I'm saying his name right. Sayyid
Qutb.
Qutb. And again, who was he?
Sayyid Qutb was a literary critic, and he worked in the Ministry of Education. And in 1948, he came to America. He went to Greeley, Colorado, where he studied for 2 years. And it's interesting because, we're always asking, why do they hate us so much, and how could they have lived among us and turned against us? This was the first example of someone who came to America, actually a fan of American movies and American literature, arrived and became so disillusioned by what he saw as the kind of spiritual wasteland and the materialism and so on in Greeley, Colorado in 1948, that he rediscovered himself as a radical Muslim, returned to Egypt, and began his writings against America. And it was very influential in the Muslim world at that time, which largely idolized America up until then.
And I want to let our viewers know the lines are up on the screen if you'd like to join our conversation with Lawrence Wright. 202-585-3880 for Democrats. I'm sorry, 202-585-3881 for Democrats, 202-585-3880 for Republicans, and 202-585-3882 for all others. We'll begin taking your calls in just a few minutes. Why was Sayyid Qutb's book banned in Egypt?
Well, it was very radical, and he divided the world into, the world of Islam and the world of Jahiliyyah, which in Islamic terms means this kind of world of ignorance and sin that existed before Muhammad received his divine prophecies. He said that there is no true Islam yet, and that even countries that are nominally Islamic, such as Egypt or Saudi Arabia, are living in this world of ignorance and sin, and therefore are subject to jihad, to being overthrown by radical Muslims, and so that they could establish the kind of state that they believe is pure Islam, something that was reflected in like the 6th century.
And so he was supportive of overthrowing the Egyptian government, or the moderate...
By any means, and as he said, the bloody instrument of jihad.
How did the Egyptian government react to that? Was there a king when he came back?
Yes, there was when he came back in 1950, and Nasser overthrew the king in 1952. And initially, Sayyid Qutb was a great supporter of the revolution, but he and Nasser had different visions about the future of Egypt. Nasser was much more of a secular socialist, and Sayyid Qutb wanted an Islamic state.
And how did Nasser treat Qutb?
Originally, he put him in charge of this Muslim Brothers magazine. Qutb actually had an office in the Revolutionary Council. I mean, he was a close advisor to Nasser, but the contradictions in what they saw as the future of Egypt eventually separated these men. And Nasser, there was an attempt on his life in 1954, and at that point he rounded up all these Islamists.
An attempt by the Muslim Brotherhood?
By the Muslim Brotherhood. And he imprisoned many of them, including Sayyid Qutb. And at that point, Qutb's writing took a sharper turn towards radicalism. And the result of that was this book called Milestones, which was unbelievably influential in terms of shaping the thoughts of many young Muslims in the Arab world.
And after Nasser, President Sadat was president of Egypt for 10 years?
That's correct.
And what was his relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood? How did he kind of treat them?
Well, Sadat wanted to establish his own political legacy and separate himself from Nasser. So Nasser had repressed the Muslim Brotherhood, and many of them were in prison. Thousands were in prison. And Sadat freed them. And he thought he had an understanding with them, that he would create a more a climate of greater liberty concerning religious practices in Egypt. He himself was a very devout and pious man, but he didn't realize the danger that these people would pose to his own regime. He thought his own piety would protect him, but they had a very distinctive agenda that Sadat was not living out.
And Sadat was assassinated by?
Yeah. He was assassinated by a small group of jihad people, that the same organization that Ayman al-Zawahiri is a member of. And Lieutenant Khalid Islambuli was the actual assassin, but it's a small cell inside Cairo, mainly military people. And in October 1981, there was a military parade, and Sadat was standing in review as the parade pass by, and then suddenly one of these cars swerves over to the stand, and grenades are thrown into the reviewing stand, and Lieutenant Islambuli jumps out with his machine gun and empties it into Sadat, it's amazing to see Sadat standing at attention while this happens. Now, everybody else is diving for cover, but he stands there until he's dead.
So how does al-Zawahiri get from the plot to assassinate Sadat to Osama bin Laden's associate?
Well, even before the assassination, Zawahiri had gone to Pakistan to work in the Red Cross, the Red Crescent Society. And he may have met bin Laden as early as 79 or 80 when he first went there. But after he got out of prison in 1985, he went to Riyadh, to Jeddah, where bin Laden was living at that time. And later that same year, he went to Peshawar, where bin Laden was going back and forth raising money for the cause. They probably would have met at that time. And at that time, Zawahiri was 34 years old, and bin Laden was 28, a young and impressionable man. Zawahiri was a hardened convict, had formed his views in prison. You know, he had been hammered into this very, very strongly Islamic-oriented propagandist. And he saw Osama bin Laden, with all of his money and with all of his potential, as the future of the Islamic movement. And he set out to surround this young man and capture him.
First call up for Lawrence Wright, Allentown, Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Good morning. First, let me say thank you for pronouncing nuclear correctly.
Thank you.
I'm so tired of hearing nuclear from people who should know better, like the Secretary of the Navy. Okay, my question is about Dr. Zawahiri. He's a doctor, and I understand that bin Laden has health problems. Is he a medical doctor, and is that one of the reasons? Does he serve double duty to bin Laden and his organization?
Yeah, he was a surgeon, and you know, bin Laden had chronic health problems. It's not exactly clear what all of them were. You know, we've heard many times about his kidney problems, for instance, and yet the man that's responsible for starting that idea that bin Laden had kidney problems told me that he never observed that. But he did have low blood pressure, for instance, and he would often faint during these battles. They would, you know, in Afghanistan, he would have to get transfusions of glucose, and Zawahiri would treat him. And he also may have had some other kinds of, such as Marfan syndrome, you know, that's common with really tall people. We don't know all the kinds of problems, but it's clear that he needed the attendance of a doctor, and Zawahiri supplied his medical attention as far as we know.
You used the past tense when you talked about Osama bin Laden. Do you think he's dead?
I think he's dead, but I have no inside information about it.
What about Ayman al-Zawahiri?
Zawahiri got married last week to 2 widows. This is what I'm told. At least these are the fundamentalists that I've spoken to say that 2 widows of a comrade that was killed during the American bombing in the fall. He summoned them to see that, you know, they would marry him, and they agreed. And after a 3-month journey, wherever he is, they are now Mrs. Zawahiri's.
New York City, good morning.
Good morning. Yes, given that you think that Osama is dead and Zawahiri is married, do you think the threat from al-Qaeda is now receded? Or do you think that they're still as ambitious as they're made out to be? And do you think that they're pragmatic enough to team up with Saddam, even though he's a secular leader, and, you know, to team up with a state-sponsored terror? And thank you for taking my call.
Sure. Let me say this. First of all, I don't know that bin Laden is dead, but if he is dead, that's an irreplaceable loss. The charismatic leadership that he provided, and the money and the connections, is you know, unprecedented. However, that said, there still is a widespread network around the world and many capable people such as Ayman al-Zawahiri who are still in charge. And as for Iraq, I don't know. I mean, there are rumors that Zawahiri himself went to Iraq in the early 80s. Bin Laden supposedly met with Saddam, according to Saddam's mistress. So I think that Bin Laden has certainly shown himself to be pragmatic, although every fundamentalist will tell you that that Bin Laden despises Saddam and would have nothing to do with him. So, and yet he has. So you can take that for what it's worth.
Do you know why he would despise Saddam?
Saddam is a secular leader, and he's never imposed a Sharia, which is Islamic law. It's a fundamental thing that the Islamists are seeking. Is they want to impose the rule of Islamic law throughout the Arab world, and Saddam has not done that and has shown really no inclination to do it.
You tell a story in your article about Ayman al-Zawahiri imposing Sharia on some young boys.
This is a really savage story. The Egyptian intelligence had penetrated in Sudan, where Zawahiri and bin Laden were living in the early 90s. And they formed a spy network composed of children, young boys, that they seduced, essentially, drugged, sodomized, and videotaped, and then threatened with blackmail to expose them to their own fathers. And these boys became the nucleus of a network in the Sudan and turned out to be a very productive network for the Egyptian intelligence. At one point, the Egyptians decided that they wanted to go ahead and kill Zawahiri, and they knew where he was going to meet. And they gave one of these boys, who was about 13 or 14 years old, a suitcase full of explosives. The Sudanese intelligence had by now figured that something was going on, and they caught this boy with the explosives in hand and put him in jail. Zawahiri asked for this boy and another one that had been captured by the Sudanese simply to question them, he said. And what he did was put them on trial in a Sharia court for treason, and then execute them. Videotape their confessions and their execution and have them widely circulated as a warning to anyone that that might try the same thing. And this became a very divisive action within the Islamic community because it seemed really cruel. And Zawahiri complained we were only imposing Sharia, and if we can't impose it on ourselves, you know, we don't have the right to do it with anyone else. The Sudanese took a very dim view of this, and because, you know, they were already under pressure from the Americans and the Saudis to get rid of these guys, so they decided to throw them out.
Next call for Lawrence Wright, Cincinnati. Good morning.
Good morning, Peter, and good morning, Mr. Wright. I'm a subscriber to the New Yorker, and I read your article, and I found it very, very informative. And your article just reinforces my feelings about Mr. Bush's planned invasion of Iraq. I feel that to rush in and invade Iraq might well play into the hands of al-Qaeda. Imagine a scenario where Mr. Bush invades Iraq, elements of al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups based in Pakistan decide to launch a series of terrorist attacks on India. This prompts India to declare war on Pakistan. A nuclear exchange follows where, say, the city of Karachi is bombed. Mass chaos ensues. Other fundamental Islamists in Egypt decide this is a good time to overthrow Hosni Mubarak's government. The Palestinians are thus emboldened to even further their attacks against Israel, and it just degenerates from there. Any comments that you might have, I'll take off the air. Thank you.
Sure. I'm not a global political strategist, so I'm not going to be able to help you very much with that. But I don't think that, I mean, the situation is degenerating as fast as it possibly can under any circumstances. And I don't know that war is going to affect it positively or negatively. We're in an incredibly volatile situation in the Middle East right now.
Let's go back to his point about Iraq. Did you see any proof that Ayman al-Zawahiri was in contact with Iraq, and was his... there?
Well, there was an article previously in the New Yorker, I think in February, by Jeff Goldberg about the Kurds. And while he was there, he ran into a Kurdish intelligence officer who said that he had escorted Zawahiri around Baghdad in 1983. I don't have any further evidence that Zawahiri has been to Iraq.
Is the Egyptian government still after him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one thing I guess people in this country don't understand is that Egypt has been suffering from the effect of this kind of terrorism really since the early 90s. There, you know, been one attempt after another on the prime minister, on Mubarak. Thousands of people have died in Egypt as a consequence of terrorism. Bombs, murders. You know, if you think back to the terrible events in 1997 in Luxor, where something like 80 people were machine gunned, and it's just, you know, it's been a horrible plague in that country, and the government of Egypt has responded with great brutality and thoroughness, crushing the Islamist movement pretty much altogether inside that country.
Next call for Lawrence Wright, Brooklyn. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Wright. I want to ask if we have been fed the right information for the last year with the regards to the terrorist group. We have an administration. I am a Republican for many, many years, and I've watched this for many years. I regret that there's so many things being done against other nations with our tax money, and they keep saying it's the terrorists. We have administration there that is hungry for fuel. All of those guys there is looking to get the fuel out of down by Saudi Arabia. They feel if they get the U.S. and Britain on one side and the U.S. on the other, will control the fuel and bring it in as they please in this regard. Israel should have the right. Palestine people, everybody in this world should have the same right to live without nonsense. It's not too often that you could come over and bust a window out of my house without me going bust yours. And it went on for many years. I think it's time that we come to the real facts of life and do away with this war, because going there to do away with Saddam Hussein is not going to do nothing but escalate the East much, much worse than it is. And there's too many cells around. We could sit down at the table and get everybody together, draw up the conclusions, and stop this nonsense that's slaughtering innocent people. We're mighty, sure we are might, but our God is much mightier, and he knows which way it's going to go. The Bible must fulfill. They said before the end of time it'd be wars and rumor wars, and we don't need this kind of nonsense. I agreed with Colin Powell and the UN Kohanen to sit down at the table.
Lawrence Wright, any reaction?
Well, I wish that sitting down at the table was the easy, you know, the practical solution. I don't know. We've sat at the table many times, and I think I'd like to separate the war on terror and the prospective war on Iraq. There's no sitting down at the table with the terrorists. It's something that we have to. It's an action we have to finish, and it's going to take a long time. I think that it's wishful thinking to believe that the thousands of people that went through those training camps in Afghanistan have been put to sleep by our actions. That is something we're going to have to do, with great commitment. Unusual for this country. Historically, we have not reacted with the kind of persistence that we need to. The war in Iraq, I think it's an entirely separate issue, and I don't think it should be conflated. And I think it's unfortunate right now the conversation in the Capitol, all over the country, is getting mixed up with these, with this war on terror, which we have to pursue. The other one, I don't take a stand on it. I don't know enough about Iraq to speak about it, but I do know that this particular war that we're engaged in right now, we have to finish.
My notes say that you had a breakfast meeting at the White House yesterday.
Yes. Well, that was not with the president. It was First Lady has a writers group. She honors different American writers, and I was fortunate to have been included.
Why were you included?
Well, I
live
in Texas, and I've known the Bushes there, and so we have a common interest in literature. And the First Lady's been just terrific in terms of promoting Texas writers, and so she extended this offer for me to come to be just a member of the audience in this symposium on women writers in the West.
Next call for Lawrence Wright, Arlington, Virginia. Good morning.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Sure can.
I'd like to ask the writer, if you doubt, and do you doubt, that the Jewish Mossad had something to do with that?
Something to do with?
With 9/11.
The only thing I can say about that is that there was, there were a group of Israelis who were arrested maybe on 9/11, or shortly thereafter. There was a woman in New Jersey who heard the plane crash and went out of her, looked out of her apartment window at the burning World Trade Center and heard some commotion in the street below. And she looked down, and there were some people standing on top of a moving van who were, according to her, slapping each other on the back and doing high fives and videotaping themselves with the burning World Trade Center in the background. And so, she had her binoculars, she looked down, got their license plate, and called the FBI. And it turned out to be all Israelis, and they had a moving company. The FBI opened a criminal investigation on them. When their nationality was discovered, it was changed to a counterintelligence investigation because the FBI believed that this might be an Israeli military intelligence group, and who might have penetrated perhaps some cell in Hamas cell in New Jersey. And then right after that, they were deported. So more than that, I can't say. It's a very anomalous thing. I don't know any more about it than that.
Cape Coral, Florida. Good morning.
Good morning to you. One little question here. The Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia has been very, very active for a long time, and I feel sure that some of this influence from there helped to lead to the overthrow of the Shah. I was in Iran at that time, and I had been for 5 years, and I saw myself, when the trouble was going on, people with guns coming out of the bazaar, and they were wearing the Arab headdress that is common to Saudi Arabia. A lot of them at that time were given the name of Palestinians, but I feel sure that they were possibly Saudi as well as Palestinian. And I also think that bin Laden is still alive and may be hiding out somewhere in south of Saudi, somewhere around between Salail and Karmi's Mashade in the mountains around there with the Yemenis. I do think that this Al-Qaeda business saw its birth in Saudi with the Wahhabis long before the Shah was overthrown. And this, of course, I think affected your Egyptian friends and the rest of it.
There's what I can say about this is that there has been a correspondence between the Egyptians and the Saudis that goes back to Said Qutb, and when he was arrested, and many of the Muslim brothers, when they got out of prison, went to Saudi Arabia. And Said Qutb's brother, Muhammad Qutb, became a professor in Jeddah and was one of the professors of Osama bin Laden, for instance. So the influence has gone both ways. Certainly the Wahhabis have funded a lot of the radical Islam that's grown up in the Arab world and all over the world. But the Egyptians have also influenced the conservative Islamic policies in Saudi Arabia themselves.
Next call for Lawrence Wright, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Good morning.
Yes, Mr. Host, don't cut me off. I want to ask you to get a couple of questions, then I want to make a comment. Mr. Wright, what religion affiliation are you?
I grew up in the Methodist Church.
You're a Christian?
Yeah.
Do you know any radical Christians in this country, or radical Jews?
I've made a kind of specialty about writing about religion over the years.
But what about radical Christians? I always hear you guys talk about radical Islams or radical Muslims. What about who are the radical Christians? Did y'all call Timothy McVeigh a radical Christian? Did anybody call him that? Isn't it that you people, and I know that the press is owned by Jewish people who are not in ethnicity but in religion, is it that you people are really at Islam and using radicalism to trying to get rid of Islam because it's one of the fastest growing religions in the world and it is overtaking Christianity, particularly among the non-whites? Isn't it that? And I know now the Arabs have gotten in bed with the Anglo-Saxons over the years and have stolen everything. They've done the same thing to black people that the Anglo-Saxons have. And now, they're like dogs lie down. You lie down with dogs, you're going to get fleas. Now the Anglo-Saxons are back at the Arabs. And what they want to do now is they want to have one power, and that's a European power. Isn't it that you people have in your radicals, your Osama bin Laden, of the Jewish people of Israel, in that your bin Laden, where you give all the money to those radicals and they go and do terrorism throughout the Arab world? And another question, sir, isn't it that the United States government, some of the people in the government, wants Israel to control the whole Arab world? Isn't it?
Well, let me talk about, first of all, I've studied religion as a reporter for years and years, and there are radical elements in every religion, and there's a fundamentalist upsurge in every world religion right now. It's not just Islam. Certainly Christianity, and especially in this country, has a very strong fundamentalist element, and as does Judaism and Hinduism. And in almost every case that I can think of, this has led to confrontation and oftentimes bloody escalations between these different groups. I think the whole world has, since the end of the Cold War, the world has been divided not between capitalism and communism, but between the forces of modernity and the forces of tradition. And that's where these, you can see it so clearly in Egypt, or all over the Arab world, where they're confronting modernity and the fear of losing the traditions that make them who they are, cause people to turn towards fundamentalism. It's an understandable sociological cause and effect. And I don't single out Islam as being unusual in having this radical fundamentalist element. It's just that right now we're in conflict with it, and in Israel itself, that country is torn apart right now by very conservative Orthodox Jews that some of them want to blow up the Dome of the Rock and so on. Those kinds of radical elements are loose in every religion in this world right now.
Well, back to your article in the New Yorker regarding Ayman al-Zawahiri. Does Israel play a prominent role in his formation?
Yeah, he hates Israel, hates Jews. He wrote a poem to his mother about Jerusalem while he was in prison. He denounces Judaism, and he even commissioned a study on America that seems to have been a pretext for targeting America for his Egyptian group in order to get more money from bin Laden. And the conclusions were very similar to what the caller expressed, that Jews are in charge of this country, and that the whole point of American policy is to make the world safe for Israel, and therefore it's right and proper for his group, which was Egyptian Islamic Jihad, to target America. And bin Laden was sufficiently pleased by this report to raise the budget of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad to $500,000 a year. So,
who did the study for him?
I don't really know. I mean, I'm writing a book about this, Peter, and those are the kinds of questions that the fill-in-the-blank sorts of things that I've got to spend a lot of time, years probably, trying to figure out who is who in every one of these departments.
Next call, Newcastle, Indiana. Good morning.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good.
I don't really have a question as much as I have a comment. And the nature of a lot of the calls this morning concern me. You know, if a venomous snake invades your house, do you wait for him to bite before you do something about it? We got bit a little over a year ago, and it seems like a lot of the callers think we should be bitten again before we do anything. The 2 or 3 callers ago, the guy said that the administration, I think, basically had this incredible need for oil. And I say to him, sir, so do you. You would not have been able to make your phone call this morning had it not been for oil, the plastic that your phone is made of, the truck that brought the morning coffee to you for your breakfast. My goodness, people, I'm glad our forefathers had more foresight than we seem to have now, because if we just sit back and watch these people, they're going to do it again and again and again and again. It's time to act, and that's basically my comment.
There's a perception in the Arab world that there are only 2 poles of American policy, oil and Israel, and and those are important. You know, that is the axis in much of our policy. You know, we have to make it clear that, you know, I think that America has failed in the Arab world. I want to make it clear. You know, we impose standards on the rest of the world, especially in Asia and Latin America, for democracy. And we didn't do that in the Arab world because we were afraid of the results. And what I heard when I was in Egypt recently is we're only asking for you to adopt the same standards for us that you have in the rest of the world. And I think that's a good point. We need to be supporting democratic elements in civil society all over the world, not just in places where we're afraid that we might lose our access to oil.
Next call, Washington, D.C. Good morning.
Hello?
You're on the air.
Hi. I would like to respond to some comments made by Mr. Wright. First of all, I'm a fan of the New Yorker, and I've read much of his writings in the past, and I do find it very educational and informative. I was shocked, though, at your response to the previous caller about the Israeli Mossad's participation or alleged participation in the 9/11 attacks. Would you basically just inferred or help perpetuate as a rumor that another foreign government, a friendly one to ours, had previous knowledge of these attacks and or participated in them without giving the name of this woman, the identity of these people, any kind of background information of it? This is something that even the head of the Arab American Defamation League, Mr. Zogby, has said when reported of Arabs slapping each other on the back on top of a truck, congratulating themselves, was a false rumor that he's spent time investigating. So I'm not sure where that kind of rumor comes from, but it's a very dangerous one, and I was very shocked that you as a journalist would simply just perpetuate it so haphazardly, so backhandedly, without any kind of information. I think the Israeli government would have some serious arguments with you and that kind of reporting. Do you have any other information, some hardcore information that you could pass along to us on that?
Well, it's not a rumor. This did actually occur, and these people have. You know, there was a very interesting report on it on ABC a couple of months ago, and the people that were deported have been on talk shows in Israel talking about it. They claim they're not a part of of an intelligence group. I'm only reporting what actually happened. I don't have an opinion about what they knew, or I was not trying to make an inference. I'm only saying that this did happen. They were under investigation by the FBI. They were deported, and beyond that, I don't understand very much about it. I'd like to know more about it, but that's all I can respond to the caller.
Marietta, Georgia, good morning.
Hello. I have a statement and a question. The first one is, in your opinion, if we bomb Iraq, do you believe, or can it happen that the radicals in Pakistan will take over and therefore get the atomic bomb? The other thing is when Powell met with the Israeli president, they had a conference before the cameras in front of the world, and the president of Israel said that the capital of the United States is in Israel. I'm still waiting for the president to tell us that that's not a fact. That's all.
I don't know anything about the second part of that. I will relate a conversation I had the other day with this official in MI5, which is the British equivalent of the FBI, and his concern is that with the the destruction of the sanctuary that Afghanistan was for Al-Qaeda, that the radicals in this movement will have no place to go, but they'll have to stay in their own countries where they'll be bottled up. And their agitation will then turn more directly to the governments in their own countries, such as Pakistan and Egypt. And that this could be, from an intelligence point of view, a really dangerous turn of events. Because if there was a radical takeover in Pakistan, which is nuclear armed, it could have just devastating consequences.
Bill Gertz writes this morning in the Washington Times that terror cells at liberty to strike, that Ramzi bin al-Shibh, the September 11th organizer who was just captured, says Al-Qaeda has decentralized its leadership structure, making it more dangerous. Is the gentleman you write about, Ayman al-Zawahiri, is he in control of Al-Qaeda?
There are some reports that he is, and he would be the natural successor to bin Laden. If bin Laden is dead or incapacitated, then he's the guy that'd be running the show.
Should we be worried about Al-Qaeda cells still?
Yes.
In the U.S.?
Yes. We don't know the extent of this network. It's been a shock, I think, to everyone to see how widespread it is all over the globe. And for instance, the arrest the other day in Lackawanna, I don't know. I've talked to people in the FBI about it, and they say that, these guys did train in Afghanistan. We don't know exactly what they were up to, but, they were fighting another country's war, and we don't approve of that. But that's the kind of thing that we have to be much more vigilant about. And there may be other cells like that here. Whether there are cells present now, there may be people on their way, to do us harm either in this country or abroad.
Next call for Lawrence Wright, Bronx. Good morning.
Yeah, hi. I have two quick questions. The first one, do you think all Egyptians are terrorists? And the second one is, why is there a double standard when it comes to Iraq and Israel about violating UN resolutions? They violated pretty much the same amount of resolutions. Why should we go bomb Iraq and not Israel?
I don't want to respond to the second part of it because I'm not really sure what would be accomplished by bombing Israel. But let me say something about Egyptians. Maybe this caller is Egyptian. I lived in Egypt 30 years ago. I taught 2 years at the American University in Cairo and formed very deep, close ties to that country and to people there. And I love Egypt. It's very unhappy to me that that we've come to a stage of alienation that we have, not just with Egypt, but with much of the Arab world. And I do not think that all Egyptians are terrorists. I think that they've waged a very valiant struggle against terrorism in their own country. That some Egyptians are terrorists, yes, but would never want anyone to believe or infer from my comments that I think that all Egyptians or all Arabs or all Muslims are terrorists. I don't believe anything of the sort.
Would the Egyptians, are there free elections in Egypt?
No, there are elections, but it's essentially an autocratic dictatorship. I think that all of political Islam is a kind of political bubble that's formed because of the lack of democratic outlets and the lack of civil society. There are many people who identify with political Islam that have completely different agendas than their compatriots. It's just that they don't have the alternative party structures to pour their political thoughts into. They have no way of expressing themselves politically. The only thing that happens in these autocratic dictatorships that are so common all over the Arab world, the only thing that the autocrats are afraid of is the mosque. And so it becomes a countervailing force that I think is very artificially inflated because there's so little in between.
What's the level of crackdown with the Mubarak government with regard to the Islamic fundamentalists?
Oh, they've completely crushed them.
More so than Sadat or Nasser?
Yeah, it's in fact now I think it would be fair to say that there's not really in terms of violent political struggle, there's very little of that in Egypt. It had all fled the repression of the Mubarak government.
And this note in the Washington Times, President Mubarak's son was named the third most powerful member of the ruling party's secretariat and assigned by his father to a new policy-making committee, shoring up his political importance. Next call, Chandler, Arizona. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Wright. I'm an American. I'm also a Saudi. And I was taught in Saudi Arabia that they didn't teach us to hate Americans, first of all. And Ayman al-Zawahiri was kicked out of Egypt because for some reason he was kicked out of Egypt. And Osama bin Laden was kicked out of Egypt, out of Saudi Arabia too. My comment is about you were saying about Saudi Arabia that they go by Wahhabism or Salafi. I just want to make a correction. Saudi Arabia goes by the Quran. They follow everything in the Quran, and there's no difference. There's no difference between Saudi Arabia or Iran. Or I know that the majority of Iranians are Shia, but still, Saudi Arabia goes by the Quran. They don't have different beliefs than other Muslims. And thank you, Mr. Wright. Thank you. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate your call. I'd like to go to Saudi Arabia myself. I've been having trouble getting a visa. I want to go learn more about that country. I've never had the opportunity to go.
Why would you have trouble getting a visa?
Well, it's not easy to get into Saudi Arabia. It's a tightly controlled country, and they're not really very encouraging of visitors like me. But I'm dying to go visit it and learn more about it.
Lawrence Wright has been with the New Yorker since 1992 and is a recipient of the National Magazine Award. Next call comes from Montgomery, Alabama.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. A question for you, Lawrence. Regarding Egypt and al-Zawahiri and bin Laden and the al-Qaeda development, what we have seen over the last few years, and especially what's accelerated since 9/11, is looking at the financial networks that were and are utilized and their connection to the Muslim Brothers. And I would like to know if you've turned up in your investigations, especially in Egypt, further evidence that the networks that were set up going back to the 30s in Egypt and using Switzerland as a base and elsewhere for these financial movements that were ostensibly were effectively underground over the years that apparently were tapped into by al-Qaeda. I would like to hear what you have learned regarding the Muslim Brothers, please.
The Muslim Brothers were formed in late 20s in Egypt and became a kind of prototype for the Islamic movement throughout the Arab world. And they were suppressed under Nasser, and he thought that he had destroyed them, and they just simply went into prisons and underground. When Sadat freed the Muslim Brothers, their influence just grew startlingly, and they formed a kind of student group called the Gamma Islamiyya, or Islamic group, which was not nominally associated with it, but it was really very closely tied to the Muslim Brothers. Tied philosophically and religiously. You know, they believed in preaching their word, for instance. They were an open, above-ground organization. And their leader was Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman, who we know in this country as the man who was the inspiration behind the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993. And he's in prison for the conspiracy to bomb other New York landmarks, such as the Lincoln and Holland tunnels, the United Nations, and the Federal Building in New York City. I think that there was a strong connection between the Muslim Brothers and the Islamic group. Now, Jihad is a different group, and this is Zawahiri's group. It was not associated with the Muslim Brothers, and it does not believe in preaching revolution. It has no confidence in the masses. It believes in, you know, military coups, you know, grabbing the reins of government, you know, in sudden surprise. And I think, you know, if I can make this distinction, money did go into Islamic group. If the Muslim Brothers are influential in that, I don't know that much about the flow of money from the Muslim Brothers, and that's another thing I'd like to find out when I do this book. But I think that the route would have gone through Sheikh Omar Abdul Rahman's group rather than Zawahiri's.
Next call, Los Angeles. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I want to say that the problem is not Muslims. The Muslim people are good and bad like everybody else. The problem is Islam itself, because Islam teaches a lot of radicalism and a lot of hate. And the Muslims or the Arab countries, whatever you want to call, they don't look at themselves, see why is this going on, and they try to either you say Islam hijacked or Islam was taken out of context, and they blame everybody else for the problems. It's time for them to look at themselves. Why is Islamic countries so backward? Why are they all dictatorships? Why everybody converts to Islam, becomes fundamentalist, becomes terrorist? They have to look into their teachings before they start blaming everybody else for their problems.
I think it is a time for reflection in Islam and in the Arab world, and not just because of the violence that has come out of there, but because of the fact that in the whole world, the Arab world has been so financially retarded, sociologically brought to a halt. I don't blame Islam for that. I think that the real problem is the lack of democracy, and I think that the United States could do a lot to encourage democratic movements in these countries and support civil society. I think that this can be done in an Islamic country. If you look at Southeast Asia and Indonesia and places like that, the largest Islamic country, they've had much more progress than the Arab world has had. So I really attribute it as a political problem and not a religious one.
Lawrence Wright is the author of this article in The New Yorker, the September 16th issue of The New Yorker, The Man Behind bin Laden, talking about Ayman al-Zawahiri. Next call, Arlington, Virginia. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. You mentioned that Mr. bin Laden and Mr. al-Zawahiri has some charisma. I would like to ask about the source of your information about Mr. Zawahiri was sodomizing children. I don't see anything charismatic about this. And if it is the Egyptian intelligence or government, Egyptian government sources, that's not credible at all to report in your book, because this creates gaps and misinformation to American people. An answer also to the caller before me, why is the Islamic world is backward. Don't forget that this area has been colonized for centuries, and the West, British and French and American, always have interest in this area, and that is causing a lot of problems.
On the subject of the episode in Sudan where the young boys were sodomized, I'm not attributing that to Zawahiri. That was Egyptian intelligence that did that. There are numerous sources for this story. I've talked to a number of Islamists who know about the episode. There's trial testimony in Cairo to that same effect, and it's not at all doubted in the American intelligence community. So I feel very confident of the truth of those allegations.
What acts of terror have been attributed to Ayman al-Zawahiri throughout his life?
His assault on Egypt began in 1993 when he attempted to assassinate the Egyptian prime minister, and following that the interior minister. He failed in both cases. In one instance, the Islamic Jihad had a car bomb that was intended for the interior minister, and it actually killed a young schoolgirl named Shaima and injured 24 other people. They also killed a witness to that crime to keep it from being prosecuted. So essentially, he's in Egypt himself. The early years were, unproductive. In 1995, he blew up the Egyptian embassy in Islamabad, Pakistan, and killed a number of people there. After that, his actions seem to have been folded more into al-Qaeda. In 1993, for instance, Mohammed Atta, one of the Egyptians, was sent to Somalia by bin Laden to see what could be done about fighting the American troops who were there in the aid effort, in the famine relief effort. And the Black Hawk Down battle seems to have been trained by al-Qaeda people, by the Egyptian elements of al-Qaeda. And after that, it was the embassy bombings and all that sort of thing, in which Zawahiri was a part of.
Was he tied to the '98 American embassy bombings?
Yeah. His Mohammed Atta, once again, and Ali Muhammad, who is in prison here awaiting sentencing, sized up the embassies and gave reports about how it could be accomplished.
Next call, Hoboken, New Jersey. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, it's absolutely right what Mr. Wright had said, that they were parked, the moving company that turned out to be the intelligence officers for the Israeli Mossad. They were parked, and then when the plane hit, they were filming it, and they were jumping for joy, and that's when the woman called the police, and they were stopped on the highway. And what had happened, the company folded up. They took off, leaving a lot of people high and dry with their possessions and storage and all, and they disappeared. So what he said is absolutely right. The other gentleman who called and said they were Arabs, no, they were Israeli. Now, if the Mossad knew something about this and did not say anything to us or shared with us, and they probably thought maybe a few hundred people would die, that's a total shame, because thousands died. But everything that Mr. Wright had said is true. They would.
Okay, I got to cut you. We're running short on time. Yeah. Final comment.
I don't know that these were intelligence people. All I know is that it was, investigated as an intelligence operation, and it was aborted by the deportation of the people that were involved.
What would you like people to bring away from the article that you wrote in the New Yorker?
I'd like for them to understand that this movement began years ago, that there are political reasons for it, and that we can understand. I mean, there are 19 hijackers. People can only name one. We need to learn more. This is the greatest crime in American history. We need to understand where these people are coming from and what we can do in the future to counter it.
Lawrence Wright is a staff writer with The New Yorker. His article on Ayman al-Zawahiri is in the September 16th issue of The New Yorker. Thanks for joining us
Peter,
this morning.
Thank you very much.
In just a few minutes, the House is going to be in session. I want to let you know that tomorrow in the Washington Journal, Duncan Hunter and Ike Skelton, both members of Congress and members of the House Armed Services Committee, where Secretary Rumsfeld is testifying, will be here to take your calls. Also, Representative Rahal, who just returned back from Baghdad, he will also be here to take your calls on the Washington Journal tomorrow. 2 live hearings that we're covering were at 10 a.m. this morning. Secretary Rumsfeld in front of the House Armed Services